Hey, Midgardians, I'm Clay.
And I'm Joe.
Welcome to That Midgard Show. This is a podcast where we talk about the Midgard campaign setting published by our friends at Kobold Press.
Yep. And in this episode, we continue our series on the locations and lore found in the Holy Robes of Sister Adelind, chapter of Empire of Ghouls. So in this chapter, where your players start to do a great deal of traveling around Midgard.
Yeah, this chapter again starts your players in Zobek, and then they move up to Grisal, then up to Karasin in the Grand Duchy of Dorneg, which is located just over the border of the former electoral kingdom of Cracovia. From there, they'll head to the city of Jost in the Wolfmark, and finally, they'll pass through various locations of the Greater Duchy of Morgu to their final destination in Jarlsberg. Along the way, the PCs will get to use a Shadow Road as part of their travels, which introduces a whole new level to this adventure. Now, because there's so much to unpack in this chapter, our discussion will take place over a few episodes in our ongoing Empire of the Ghouls series. We'll do our best to avoid spoilers by focusing on lore, locations, and notable PCs. But if we feel we're treading into spoiler land, we'll let you know.
Absolutely. So a lot to unpack, like you said. And a side note, too, because your players will be traveling the Shadow Roads, there's been some great blog posts recently on the Kobold Press blog on the Shadow Roads and on the ley lines that's worth taking a look at that can kind of aid you with some of this. But this adventure in the campaign begins when the PCs receive a summons to the Temple of Rava from the Clockwork Oracle, who gives them a quest to track down the Holy Robes of Sister Adelind in the former electoral kingdom of Krakova. So we talked about the Zobek's Temple of Rava in episode 11. We won't get into that in this episode, but if you haven't listened to it, go back and take a listen to that episode. Some background on the adventure hook. Adelind, who is now revered as a saint, was actually a paladin of Sif, who died a martyr fighting the undead of Morgau at Jarlsberg, which is a castle that's devoted to Sif's Order of the Spear. Her holy robes, though, are now thought to be a vital weapon in the battle to stop the evil plots of the ghouls that are, we're going to see later in this adventure. So the story says that Sif actually collected Adelind's spirit from the battlefield where she fell, and then now the saint answers the prayers of women and shield maidens who swear a righteous vengeance against the Darakul. And also, obviously, they're vampire masters, right? So she actually has her own symbols. Her symbol is the snowdrop, a flower that kind of blooms even in frost and snow. Sif herself is the goddess of family and marriage and is the gold-keeping, arrow-shooting, ale-brewing wife of Thor. The equal of any man, better than most. So she's a badass. she's the good mother and friend of the faithful. So yeah, Sif's a fairly important goddess in the north and the Crossroad region, and she wears a lot of different masks. So both married and unmarried women comprise most of Sif's followers through archers, farmers, gold-seeking dwarves, all maintaining varying degrees of fondness for her. So she's got a large following base. All female warriors give Sif her due as leader of the Valkyrie and Shield Maidens. She's also worshipped in Pernala as sister of the Duchess. So she's not just in the Marvel movies. Right?
Right.
So, yeah. So Sif demands that all of her followers are fierce and that they be faithful and that they're expected to fight for what they believe in. So she's very kind of, you get the righteous goddess kind of feel from her, right? Followers are also expected to learn the bow and axe and spear as a warrior, or raise children to be strong and true and do either or both with your whole heart. Most importantly, followers are expected to strike down evil and practice their own excellence without ever insulting another's skill. So, I like Sif for a goddess. I tried to kind of get my wife's cleric to go that route. She actually ended up going with Lada, who may or may not be a mask of Sif, but I personally don't think that that's the case. But the quest to find this relic, the robes, that's kind of the hook. Is we need these robes to fight the undead.
Yeah.
So that kind of takes us right out of Zobek into other places.
Yeah. So the players will head north from Zobek to get to their first destination, which is the Black Canton of Grisal. Now, the PCs have to head up on the mountain road. And the hard part of that road starts as they head up the Silbertal, past the ruins, and over the Gunnox Pass. And it's at that point where the road forks. It'll fork to take folks further west, or it'll head straight north into Dornig and Wolfmark. And this mountain pass closes each fall. It's high mountains, very high mountains. These aren't your typical hills, and they close each fall and reopen in the spring when the waterfalls start to flow and the snow melt begins to head into the rivers. Causing those waterfalls to open up. And also, the winter winds, they will strip the flesh off your bones. And, it's that springtime when they start to subside.
Right.
There are big bragging rights for the first mule train to make it in either direction, either down from the Cantons and into the welcoming arms of the lowlanders, or vice versa, heading up the other direction. And
I kind of get, do you get a vibe of like from Lord of the Rings, the mountain path they try to take in the snow? Like if you try to cross this thing in the winter, it would be like, Gandalf and the Hobbits buried neck deep in snow.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great
that kind of trail.
Yeah, it is hard road. Even when the pass is clear, it's hard road. Even though the mountain road is steep and cold, there are what's called dwarf holds and other safe places built into the hills and the mountains, up in the Ironcrags. And these facilities are pretty stout, and they're enough to spend the night and warm up, eat some food, pull in your mule train in there to keep them all warm and safe as well. But GMs don't make it easy on your PCs, because no matter when you travel, where you travel in anywhere in Midgard, don't expect an easy time of it. And that's because there's always the chance of getting shaken down by brigands or less than ethical groups to proceed. Now, sometimes though, a dwarf hold might decide to make a human mule train vanish. And there are stories told, although not within dwarven hearing, because that'll cause a fight right then and there. But the stories say that mule trains disappear, all of the mule skinners and things like that go with them, and they disappear into the mountains to mine gold or mithril for their bearded masters. And a lot of times these poor souls never see daylight again. And there's a section in the Canton's part of the Midgard where the dwarves will come out of the mountains every so often and kind of round up what they call thralls. Thralls are just a better word for slaves. The thralls are treated really well. They get a say at the things. The thing is like the big gathering of all of the Canton dwarves for kind of. Think of it as like a big giant legislature and a party, all at the same time. But according to the lore, the thralls are usually released after 10 years of service. Sometimes they'll stay, in the cantons, and other times some of the folks conscripted into mining, will serve their time and get the hell out of Dodge as quickly as possible. It is at this point the PCs enter the lands of the Black Canton of Grisal. And that is at the very northeastern part of the Canton borders. In fact, the River Argent and the western border of the Greater Duchy of Morgau is essentially the border. So it's kind of tiny little piece that is off on the northeast. It is at this point where it's a good opportunity to start to introducing undead to your PCs, because it's so close to the vampire empire, and this is a great time to start introducing the undead in those areas. So the one thing that I recommend to all GMs is don't hand wave to travel. The travel is the best part in this campaign. And what makes this campaign so good is that your PCs will have a lot of opportunities to explore, socialize with local denizens, and fight against the more unsavory elements of the areas they travel. So if you're going to commit to running a campaign, set those expectations with your players that this campaign could last a long time, and they should not expect combat every session. And for me, like I said earlier, the best encounters happen during exploration and socialization. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I'm a fan of that in any campaign. I mean, sometimes you montage, you need to get to the next location, you'll do a little hand waving, but when you're doing this kind of dangerous travel, right, there's so much potential for cool stuff. Think about a rock slide even, right? It doesn't have to be an encounter with monsters. It could be a rock slide. Or maybe there's already been a rock slide, it's blocking the pass, so you have to clear it. But then you clear it, and it turns out there's a bunch of zombies buried under it that pop out and attack. Like, there's so much cool potential for neat things you can do on the road in a place like this. It's a really dangerous area on the border of the Blood Kingdom, the Dwarven Cantons. And, I don't know about you, Clay, but the one thing when I first got into Midgard that I noticed was that I felt like the dwarves in Midgard, at least the Canton dwarves, are a little shady. Like, they're not just good dwarves. They're they take slaves. They put people in the mines to work. So it's like even your allies could be your enemies in a place like this. And
oh, sure.
There's so much potential. So I definitely suggest read up, like grab, if you don't have the world book, you should have it. Definitely get it. But read up a bit on the Cantons and the dwarves. There's more information in the Midgard Heroes Handbook as well, because they are a very unique breed of dwarf, and there's a lot that can be done with them, during this exploration and even socialization part, right?
Yeah.
In one of those huts or those night places, like there's a dwarf manning it, and he seems a little shady when he's offering you food. Are you gonna eat it?
Yeah,
maybe he's gonna poison you. Just weird stuff.
Yeah, I mean these dwarves, I see them as Klingons. They are.
Yes. Oh my God, that's perfect.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
They are hard living, hard playing individuals. They have a strong sense of honor, a deep devotion to their cantons.
Yes.
And if you need an analog, or inspiration, definitely the Klingons are your example,
Yeah. Because they're not necessarily evil, but they're not exactly good either. Yeah. They have a strict code. They're lawful, whatever, right? They're definitely lawful. Is it good, neutral, or evil? Yeah. But it's lawful, all right? They have a strict code.
Yeah. And also don't forget that these, this race is small compared to humans and elves and other races. So if you have a 5-foot dwarf, that's a super tall dwarf, but most of them are going to be anywhere from 3.5 feet to 5 feet tall. And they are
tough as nails.
They are tough as nails. Hit, going, fist to fist with one of those dwarves, you might as well be punching at a rock face or something like that. These dwarves are tough. They're not as hoity as the Zobek dwarves are. The Zobek, like you mentioned in previous episodes, think of them as like Vulcans, with some emotions, but they're very analog. But these guys are, I just as soon put my axe in your head and go back to the keep to drink some mead, so
it's a good day to die.
It is a good day to die. So, we can't talk about the Black Canton without talking about the Ironcrags in general. And we're not going to go super deep in the Ironcrags. We're definitely going to have some episodes about the Ironcrags themselves, because there's 13 of them, and each of them have their own distinct flavor. The cantons, like I said, 13 cantons. They're all defined by a settlement that has existed for at least 100 years or more. They contain both free and cloistered dwarves, and encompass all sets of halls. You name it. They're not just mines and simple shelter, but a proper dwarven hall, always includes a set of forges or smelters, a brewery, a set of clan homes, and at least one temple or shrine. And the population of the cantons is difficult to know because the dwarves are reluctant to count their numbers, or at least to share those numbers with anyone outside of their own canton. But, the best guess in the lore says that the cantons hold about 150,000 dwarves and perhaps 25,000 slaves outside Grisal. Here's the list, the 13 cantons, and I'll try to do some justice to their names. But a lot of them are very Germanic or Scandinavian type names. So The first is Barrix. Then there's Bundhausen, Grisal, Gunnex, Hammerfell, Uralt, Kuborg, Nordsmarcht, or Nordsmencht, St. Michau, Temple Forge, Tiano, Versailles, and Winterheim. And some of these cantons have three names, one in the common tongue, one in the southern speech, and one in dwarven speech of the Northlands. So outside the common tongue and what you see in the lore, you can make up all kinds of the names. You can give it kind of an Arabic type name, in the southern speech, or up in a more Scandinavian name, if you want to come up with 13 names, for Northlanders. But super cool, sure. Analog I also say about the Ironcrags is think Switzerland, high altitude settlements. All of them have independent cantons as well, and I think that's also a pretty good analog if you're looking for some European connection to that.
Absolutely, yeah. You killed it on the names, man. You did way better than I could have done on the names. And I cannot get I cannot get the Klingon analogy out of my head. I feel like each Canton's like a Klingon house. I'm thinking like, oh yeah, but honestly, the Klingons are probably modeled after dwarves, not the other way around. Something. But for sure, it's such a solid analogy. I'm loving it. But the Cantons are all like in like mountainous regions, right? Of the Ironcrags. And there's a lot of different kind of varying altitudes and passes, kind of make some like more accessible than others. And a few are actually separated from the main cantons by like lowlands and rivers that are inhabited by humans. So you might find human settlements in between. But there are two outliers, which are Wintersheim to the north and the dark canton of Grisal, which stands across the River Argent near Morgau and the Dorish border. Each of the free cantons is essentially its own nation within its own valleys, with its own customs and rules and traditions. The major cantons are larger and more settled. Their insignia is going to be more widely known outside of the area, while the smaller ones are equally as distinctive, but are like isolated or obscured for reasons of landscape or history, or just because they want to be. Right, that's just their preference. Much like the Klingons, right? The dwarves think of their canton first, their race or their clan second. The canton is kind of home, its hearth, its family, its wealth, its safety. It's really important, right? This is at the core of their being. These traits don't always guarantee like a greater harmony or joy among the other canton dwarves, more so than, let's say, in another race like humans. Like certain ones might get along with humans better than another clan. It varies, and it should, right? That's how people are. Canton dwarves are notoriously kind of dour, fractious, very opinionated about pretty much everything. I like the idea of like role playing a conversation with a dwarf where you really have to change his mind about something, and even though he knows you're right, he's too stubborn to budge, right? So that stubborn dwarf stereotype definitely holds up for these guys. Yeah. But the Canton dwarves, unify. Really, like they will unify, but only in the presence of some external threat, right? Which gives their elders and their leaders of their free companies basically an excuse to go on about the importance of the free dwarven cantons to the younger generation. And it's funny because I think that's something we kind of sometimes see reflected in the real world, right? Where maybe people in power might try to give others a common enemy to try to unify them against this one cause rather than against them, right? So the idea of, I could see like maybe the dwarves almost manufacturing a false enemy or a false sense of urgency about something in order to try and get all the dwarves together to help fight a certain cause. They can be tricky.
Yeah.
But the Canton of Grisal is actually claimed by both the Grand Duchy of Doring and the Greater Duchy of Morgau. So both of these other regions are like, that's our land. But of course, the dwarves say screw that, and they don't offer loyalty to either. It actually kind of, like I said earlier, it lies on the eastern bank of the River Argent, but it's all dwarven land, at least as far as the dwarves are concerned. The people there are among some of the most religious of the Cantonal dwarves, with special emphasis in worship placed on Voland and his son, the solar god of Kroos, and Grahava, which is the Shield Maiden, which is most likely a mask of Sith. Also Wotan and Thorperun. They kind of worship all of those warrior gods and stuff like that. There's a lot of paladins there. There's going to be a lot of clerics. In fact, about 1/10 of the Canton dwarves are clerics or paladins or servants of the temple in some fashion. So very big religious kind of order there. Grisal's priests are kept pretty busy since its halls stand above the zombie wood of Zaurgal, I believe is how you pronounce it, and within sight of the Temple of the Red Goddess, where the dead are brought to serve the living, which we talked about that last episode quite a bit. So really, for the most part, the Black Canton strives merely just to keep the dead at bay, right? They're just trying to protect their borders. But from time to time, it's known that young warriors mount raids against the province of Dorsch in the Blood Kingdom. They'll slaughter zombies and skeletons by the score during daylight and return across the running water, before nightfall, which is an extremely smart move. But sometimes those who fail to return are seen again as these black armored servants of the Red Goddess. So they'll be raised and turned into something that I'll talk about later, and sent back to fight the other dwarves.
Yeah, that right there is a plot hook for GMs.
Yes.
Imagine one of your PCs falling, and you see them again the next day as an undead fighter, or an NPC compatriot doing the same thing, or there's a rescue mission to go into Doresh and reclaim some of your fallen fighters who have been reanimated as undead soldiers, only to bring them back, to try to reanimate them as living human beings. So you can pull in a whole bunch of Walking Dead creepiness, into that type of hook. Yeah. And this is where, fighting undead is hard. Definitely, use these as opportunities, even though it's not in the book, use these as opportunities to really expose your players to things that they have probably never played against ever in their RPGing career.
Yeah, and I mean, and throw some emotion in there, right? Not only might it be a fallen player character, right? But let's say there's NPCs with you too. There's dwarves with you that are going over, and you're with them. And one of the dwarves' brother or father or mother is there as an undead attacking you guys, and he asks, that like, do I kill them? Do I not? Like, how does he react? How do you react? How does he react to you if you try to kill them? I mean, there's so much cool stuff you can do with it. So play it up.
Yeah. It could be a background element of any of your characters, any of your DM PCs, as well. So fun times there. So Grisal's large human and goblin population dates from times before Grisal was a canton. Those were the times when it was ruled as part of the Grand Duchy of Dornig by the elf-marked members of House Hirsch Damig. And in Midgard, remember, elf-mark are half-elves. Then the dwarves took over this territory to prevent it from falling into the hands of then Prince Lucian of Morgau, who is now the king of the Greater Duchy of Morgau. And so in the years and the centuries since, the elf-marked nobles of the Grand Duchy and Here is the longest name I've ever seen printed in a Midgard book. But, it is the Elfmark nobles of the Grand Duchy and the Imperatrix Regia Moonthorn Cathania Realm Van Dornig. That's the whole name.
Well done, sir.
Yeah, and she stated that they do not acknowledge this claim, and this argument has been the source of repeated border skirmishes between Grisal and the Grand Duchy. So at the moment, the Grand Duchy has their own stuff to deal with, so they've put any claim that Grisal is their territory aside for now. The Imperatrix, who's the ruler, super long name, kind of like Percival on Critical Role. I think his name is longer, than that, but
it might be.
That was a mouthful. I had to practice that. So
that was good. You did well.
So Grisal is led by a super tough dwarf called Inzali Hakel. He is the dwarf lord of the Halls of Grisal and the Defender of the North. That is his title. So he recently agreed to join the Argentine alliance with Zobek and the Midgard Kingdom, vowing to stand shoulder to shoulder with its allies against the threat posed by the Vampire King Lucian across the border to the east. And so this canton stands firm against the undead invaders coming over the mountains from the Blood Kingdom. Now, there is a set of special forces in Grisal. They are called the Graveslayers, and they are this elite group of undead slain warriors and pious servant of Kors who conduct frequent daylight raids into the Grisal marches to battle the skeletons and zombies and ghouls of the Blood Kingdom. Both in the mountains and beyond in the infamous zombie woods of Zwargao. Now, there is a bad side to this. Any of the Graveslayers who fail to return to the canton by nightfall are sometimes seen again as those black armored foot soldiers that Joe mentioned earlier.
Use that hook, man. The living coming back as the dead and being something you have to deal with, whether it's to kill them or save them or, at that emotional level, is just such a powerful storytelling device. So, use it.
Yeah. So tell us about the hall itself, Joe.
Well, so the Hall of Grisal is actually, it's not really said, but it's probably the capital of the Canton, even though the lore doesn't explicitly call that out. But it's an impressive above-ground fortress, right? It's built in the side of a mountain. It has a dozen or so subterranean levels, which hold armories, vaults, storerooms, mines. All this is accessible like this great central staircase. When visitors come to the hall, they're allowed to visit the upper levels, but the floors below ground are restricted to the citizens. A village of about 20 wooden houses or so lies kind of just outside in the kind of the shadow of the halls. And that's home to dwarves who make a living from herding goats, sheep, making, and they make the Canton's kind of famous nutty cheese. So that's all kind of like what you'll see as you approach, right? You'll come to these huts in this village and come to the fortress itself. And as you approach the fortress, it's an impressive sight. You have these two giant stone statues of these legendary dwarven heroes that flank the entrance of the hall. You have Yalric Coppersmelt. It was this stern-faced male warrior clad in plate armor, and he stands on the left side of the gate. And he has this big warhammer resting between his feet. And then you have Delenya Herzak, which is a female paladin. She's wearing an ornate helmet and bearing a shield emblazoned with the symbol of the sun god, standing to the right. And she's holding out a battle axe aloft. And I kind of get very, what's the city from World of Warcraft, right? Like how when you approach the city, they have all the statues of all the heroes. I kind of get that vibe from this, right?
Yeah.
But between those two statues is this huge door that generally is going to stand open to the stronghold and into the Great Hall, which is this vast public space with high vaulted ceilings that are kind of supported by these big pillars and inscribed with hundreds of names, which all these names are actually this huge list of dwarves who have died in the battle with the undead enemies. So this hall is all bustling with activity, merchants, traders, heavily armed soldiers, paladins, priests, all coming and going. And though many of Midgard's races are going to be represented in the Great Hall, it's going to be a majority of the dwarves that are going to be there. So really cool vibe to get into this bustling dwarven marketplace fortress thing. It's such a cool, unique location that you can really have some fun with. And the hall basically leads to all the various shops and other establishments, though through these large arches, including there's a place called the Dented Tankard, which is a tavern popular with military patrols returning from duty. And there's another called the Cunning Shield Maiden, which is an inn that's patronized by merchants and other travelers. So that's probably a place where if your party's not dwarven, they'll probably end up. But both offer those traditional no frill dwarven hospitality, good beer, good prices kind of deal, right? So like Clay was saying earlier, this is another place where your party can spend multiple sessions just in the hall, following up leads, exploring, socializing, shopping, gathering information, all basically to help prepare for that next leg of the journey. So this might be one of those times where it's going to be a couple of really fun sessions with no combat. Maybe there'll be a bar fight or something like that. You can always throw some bar fights in. It's always good. But this is a cool area where maybe you can utilize some resources available from other places besides Kobold Press, right? I'm a big fan of Nord Games, has a lot of cool stuff. There's stuff from DM's Guild, and I actually grabbed this one because I think this is actually a great one for this particular location. Is there's remarkable shops and there is remarkable inns, and these are both books from Loresmith, which you can really use to flesh out some of your shops and inns and places your players might hang out, because not everything is fleshed out in the book. So using resources like this can really just add that extra layer of flavor to a location like this. And like I said, this is such a cool location to hang out and do stuff in. This is the dwarves version of Zobek, in my opinion, right? It's just a cool place to hang out and have a few sessions. I mean, you played through the campaign, Clay. Like how do you use this area?
Dwarves are small in stature, but they do everything on a big scale. So when you're describing the hall, it's a massive, spacious hallway, massively high ceilings, huge chandeliers, lit with fire to light the area. That central staircase, it's not just some tiny little thing. You can march an army up and down, those stairways, down to the forges and up to the higher levels of the hall itself. So think big. If you watch the first movie of Lord of the Rings, the Mines of Moria, you saw big spaces. Big spaces. So that is pretty much characteristic in the lore of dwarves themselves. Small in stature, but they do everything at a big scale. And again, these inns and taverns are the place where a lot of fun can happen, a lot of, potential socializing, information gathering, stage a fist fight or something, or a pit fight. Dwarves are going at each other, or human versus dwarves, or human versus trollkin, or dwarf versus trollkin. That's a place where, you can kind of, have some fun and get your PCs involved to make a little money and do some combat without weapons, some hand-to-hand combat, in the fighting pits.
Or gambling, right? I mean, gambling games. I mean, dwarves are into all that kind of stuff. So, maybe there's some kind of goat races or some whatever. They'll come up with something fun, man. It's a dwarven city. Make it cool. I mean, it's already cool, but there's so much cool stuff to do with it. So take advantage. And like I said, check out DM's Guild, check out Loresmith, check out Nord. They make some really, really cool stuff that you can throw in there and flesh out some areas and just make them, give them some more depth, right?
Yeah.
And I'd also suggest your players take advantage of joining some of the raids into Dorish, right? You can use this as kind of like a means of getting more information about the Vampire Kingdom. and just to practice fighting some undead. They kind of get that exposure. This is a good opportunity to have those fallen player characters or NPCs or whatever that died earlier coming back as undead as well, like we talked about earlier. So, but there's a great encounter actually in Empire Ghouls, but I'd suggest adding additional counters with, intelligent undead and like other critters, perhaps establishing kind of a recurring antagonist to your campaign. This would be all good time to kind of start doing that. And there's a table in Empire Ghouls on page 79 that kind of includes a good mix of some encounters and things like that. So all well worth, looking into and doing. And this is the time to kind of make Empire Ghouls your own. This is a great opportunity to go off script and really own it and fit it to your group and your table.
Yeah. And remember, between Grisal and Zobek is hundreds of miles. So by the time your PCs make it to the Hall of Grisal, their resources are going to be tapped out. Yeah, so this is probably one of their only opportunities between Zobek and Grisal to stock up, before they hit the road again.
Yeah, so definitely a good shopping session.
Yep. So there are some other great complications found in some older Kobold Press publication. It's called the Iron Gazetteer. You can easily take the stuff out of there and adjust it for 5e. The book also describes, some hazards and terrain features, some magical locations and environmental rules that any GM can use to complicate the lives of player characters in the areas where the adventure is set in, or beneath the mountain, or in the mountains themselves. Don't forget that your PCs are going to be in a very high altitude environment. And the lack of oxygen at mountain altitudes can take their toll on creatures that aren't used to altitude, causing something like altitude fatigue. And then dizziness, the nausea, headaches that come with the mountains sickness. And you game masters can determine the altitude that your players are at. The mountains are tall. They're anywhere from 1,000 feet at its lowest to 22,000 feet in the air. And so really you guys can decide what the altitude is for your PCs, because the book doesn't tell you. The book leaves that up to you. And that is a great way to add a challenging dimension for your PCs whenever they're in the Ironcrags or any mountainous area. So, dwarves of the Ironcrags, frost giants, other mountain dwelling creatures are considered acclimatized to high altitudes. And also creatures that don't breathe, such as undead or constructs, they're completely immune to the effects of altitude. An example, that I kind of adapted from the Iron Gazetteer is for every 8 hours spent between 7,000 feet and 15,000 feet, have your players roll a reasonably challenged con or survival check. If they fail, perhaps they lose a couple of points off their con score, gain a level of exhaustion, or their max hit points equal their character level until they acclimatize. So, you're simulating the fatigue brought on by a combination of exertion and lack of oxygen. A lot of players don't like their stats, jacked up with. Legitimately, acclimatizing to a high mountain altitude is about a month. So the DMG does offer mechanics on high altitude, and I'm going to quote from the DMG. It says, traveling at altitudes of 10,000 feet or higher above sea level is taxing for creatures that need to breathe air because of reduced amount of oxygen in the air. So each hour a creature spends traveling at high altitude counts as 2 hours for the purpose of determining how long that creature can travel. Breathing creatures can become acclimatized to the high altitude by spending 30 days or more at this elevation. And breathing creatures can't become acclimatized to elevations above 20,000 feet unless they are native to such environments. So mountain dwarves, for sure, you can consider them, acclimatized right off the bat. Now, in the PHB, the player's handbook, a creature can travel 8 hours a day normally, and more is a forced march, which requires a con save after each hour beyond 8 with a DC of 10 plus 1 for each hour past 8, with a failure adding a point of exhaustion. So at high altitude, you can take that stuff and kind of have it. So you'll travel. You have the ability to travel for 4 hours, and every hour beyond that counts as 2 for the DC. So it's 10 plus 2. And so an 8-hour travel day would be 4 normal hours. So DC 12 at 5 hours, a DC 14 at 6 hours, a DC 16 at 7, a DC 18 at 8 hours. I also found some decent homebrew rules in a blog called Rendar's DM Resources, and it's titled Mountain Travel. And I'll put a link down in the description notes for you to take a look at that. And you can look at that and take that information and make it your own, as your PCs are in the Ironcrags. But definitely don't ignore altitude sickness in your games. And so if you're asking, what's the point of all this? All I'm suggesting is that you use the environment to increase the challenge for your PCs. No character should have the same stamina at high altitudes as they would at sea level, and the environments can be just as hostile as any foe.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you were playing in the jungles, right, the heat and humidity and plate mail would affect you, so that high altitude should affect you as well, right? I mean, it makes sense. Yeah. And it's a good extra challenge. And then, to go back a little bit there, you had mentioned the Iron Gazetteer. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of great older Kobold Press resources, right, from Pathfinder. And then there's also a Pathfinder one called Dwarves of the Ironcrag, which would be a useful one as well. So make sure take a look at some of the older stuff. Most of it, if it's not on Kobold Press's site, it's also on ttrpg. And you can, grab those PDFs pretty cheap and make some good use of them in these games, because there's a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, Kobold Quarterly is also great stuff. That's how Open Press, Kobold Press started was with that publication, and there's just so much good stuff in there. It's all ripe for adapting into your own adventures for sure.
Yeah. So definitely get on Drive. I don't know if Kobold Quarterlies are available on Kobold site, but I'm pretty sure they're on Drive-Thru. So either way, take a look at both those sites, grab some of the older material. There's so much good stuff, much good material, and we'll talk about some of that material as we go through, our podcast here, and whenever we see an opportunity that one of those books is useful, we'll mention it. As we leave Grisal, 2 days travel from Grisal is the Black Fortress. We can see this on the map as well. So this, if you follow the road north, this is the next stop along the road, and this kind of keeps the Cantons safe from Dorning to the north, and from the Blood Kingdom province of Krakovor, which is to the northeast. But this thing was built to hold the line. The Black Fortress is basically a training ground for Grisal's paladins, of course. Here, its scouts basically watch for Darakul and riders from Gaibek that are probing the defenses. So again, if you look at the map here, you'll see Gaibek is kind of the next major settlement up north. So this is their border. This is what holds the line. This is what stops troops from marching south. And I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Clay, but it's kind of like it protects a pass, doesn't it? Like you can't just march around it. It protects a pass. So it's kind of like in Game of Thrones, there was at the neck there was that swamp, and there was the castle there that kind of protected you. Had to pass through it to march south. So or to march north to the north. It's kind of like one of those. But not a whole lot is really written about the location either. So the fortress is basically commanded by a guy named Jarl Whitebeard. He's this longtime mercenary turned general late in life, and the troops there are kept in basically fighting condition, trimmed by occasional raids toward Gaibek. Commander Jarl is currently dealing with a large number of Krovokian refugees. He finds it kind of hard to turn them away, but having thousands of them on his road and building human villages in Grisal is not really a solution either. So the human refugee issue has been raised at several dwarf moots without a satisfying solution. So that's another story hook, another thing your players might have to deal with and run into and talk about. But as written, the location is kind of an information stop. But there's more you can add, right? While your PCs are there, you could throw in a festival from Warlock Grimoire 1, the Gold Miner Fair. So this is kind of a cool one, right? There's like these vast treasures, including bars of pure gold, tiny miniatures and mithril and gemstones are found, at the fair. And the fair itself is this celebration of mining and jewelry and precious metals in all forms. So it's a perfect dwarven festival. It's held perhaps appropriately in the Black Fortress, which asks all of its visitors a small donation called the Coin of Course. These funds both help the Grisal dwarves pay their rigorously huge cost for steel and soldiers that are said to curry favor with the sun god, which are basically beloved by them. The festival itself, like I said, it takes place in the fortress halls, and it is really well guarded. Those who come and go are always closely watched to avoid any kind of unfortunate theft. The goldsmiths and mithril smiths and silversmiths and jewelers of the cantons all bring their best wares to this fair. And the miners themselves come to see that what works are made from the metal they basically dug up and won from the depths of the earth. So that is something really cool you can do with it. If you're looking to flesh out the location a little bit more and add something to it, one thing I love to use in Midgard, because if you look at like the Midgard world map in general, there's a lot of settlements all over the place, towns and cities and stuff, and some of them have almost nothing written about them. There's 2 books that I would recommend. One is the City and Town Builder that Kobold Press recently released that can help you flesh out those settlements. And the other is Spectacular Settlements from Nord, which is one of my favorites that can help you, again, kind of flesh out and put some more things and purpose to these locations. So anytime you come across a location in Midgard, the City and Town Builder from Kobold Press or this book can definitely help to breathe some life into a location that really doesn't have a lot written about it. So now, Clay, when you did yours, did you use the Gold Miners Fair?
Yeah. I didn't want them to just pass through the Black Fortress.
Yeah.
I wanted to keep them there. And the other element that I used was because of all the refugees that were settling in the area, which caused a lot of problems for Jaro. You're essentially, creating a grocery store for the undead across the border. There's some hooks where there's just constant raids on the human population who's taken for food back into the vampire kingdom, or captured by the Blood Sisters and sacrificed to the goddess Marina. I really played that up. And I also played the Black Fortress and as part of the lore, it is out in the middle of nowhere. It is a fortress that stands on its own. It has to defend itself. Any help to the Black Fortress is at least 2 days away, south of them. They're straddling like 2 borders. They got that Dornig in the north, and they got the Greater Duchy of Morgau to the west. So this is, you mentioned Game of Thrones. It's also that big ice wall. You can think of this as that really remote location, and they are the proverbial Gandalf. You shall not pass. We will fight to the end to protect our canton.
Yeah, and I would suggest not forgetting dwarven engineering and dwarven ingenuity here, right? Especially if it's the way I picture it. It might not be, but this is how I would set it up: is that it's in a pass. So it's protecting a pass that you have. There's no going around it. So you have these rock walls on either side, these cliffs. Boulder traps, falling traps, things like that. Maybe if the gates are breached, they have a device up above it that they can open up as a last resort, and tons of boulders fall down in front of the gate and block the gate as a last resort to prevent the undead from getting through. You leave anybody on the outside fighting out front, or any humans or anything that need to get, they wouldn't be able to get in, but it's kind of one of those last resort things, right? So think about dwarven engineering and dwarven ingenuity and how they might defend a fortress like this. and add some of that in, because there's a lot of cool stuff that could happen there as well.
Yeah. Fun times. Can't go wrong with dwarves.
Absolutely. Nope, never go wrong with dwarves. Dwarves are cool, man. I love dwarves. I think I've only played a dwarf once in all of D&D, and yet they are still my favorite race because they're just so cool.
Yeah.
But, well, I think that kind of wraps us up for this portion of Empire of the Ghouls, which we'll continue in our next episode. But we are very, very happy to say we're bringing back Creature Showcase this week. So we've taken a break from Creature Showcase because we were trying to get through all the stuff on Zobek and just trying to get caught up and get you guys some good information out there. But we got some creatures ready for you today. So with that said, Clay, tell me what you got.
Yeah. So we're in the Cantons, so I might as well talk about dwarves. And you remember that special forces that I mentioned earlier, the Graveslayer? There's actually a stat block for a Graveslayer in the Creature Codex on page 400. Now, in the Empire of the Ghouls campaign, you have two NPCs, Havard Glimmerstone and Brogan Bonebasher. And they are both Graveslayers in the Black Canton of Grisal. The dwarves battle skeletons and zombies of Morgau, who are raiding across the river into the mountains and beyond in the infamous Zombie Wood. Now, a few members of this tradition also operate out of Wolfmark, which is the country that is directly north of the Greater Duchy of Morgau. And these guys are ferocious, but they are extraordinarily pious. And as we mentioned earlier, they are servants of the sun god, and they are the elite special forces group of undead slaying warriors. They are trained and drilled from an early age in the art of battle, and these dwarves are molded into fierce fighters against the skeletons, zombies, and worse creatures that threaten their mountain homeland. And although they're not full paladins, as we mentioned earlier, these Graveslayers have a blessing from the sun god Kors that grant them the ability to channel holy power through their weapons and ensure that the undead they slay do not rise up again. Now, we've talked about this hook before earlier in the episode. The bodies of any fallen comrade have to be carried back home whenever possible to ensure they do not line up against the dwarves as undead opponents in the future. Those left behind can become corrupted Graveslayers, reanimated by necromancers of the Blood Kingdom who use dark rituals to corrupt its soul and then enlist them to fight against their former comrades. A corrupted Graveslayer's type changes from humanoid to undead, and it inflicts extra necrotic damage rather than the radiant damage that you see in the stat box. And also, a corrupted Graveslayer loses their ability to turn undead. In the book itself, they are CR4 NPCs. I tend to buff them up as much as I can, depending on the situation. But they're tough. They have 18 AC. They wear heavy plate armor. They have a good amount of hit points. The average is 112. If you use the top end of the formula, you can be, nearing, 200 hit points. They are super strong. The dwarves, have the, resistance to poison, but these Graveslayers also have resistance to necrotic damage, which is typical of the type of damage that undead deal. They have dark vision, so they can see just fine in the dark at night, underground. And they are just badasses. They have this, what's called a blessed battle axe. And it not only does, your standard battle axe damage, when you're using it one-handed or two-handed, but if the target is undead, it'll also take an extra bit of radiant damage along with it, which, a lot of undead creatures, have that vulnerability to radiant damage. They're not paladins, but they do have the turn undead feature that they can use as an action. And, they also have this cool reaction called Brave Sacrifice. So when an ally within 5 feet of a Graveslayer is the target of an attack of another creature, the Graveslayer can swap places with their ally and become that target instead. So just imagine them just like pushing you out of the way to take the blow instead of it landing on you. usually don't pay too much attention to alignment, but in this case, I really do play up their non-evil alignments. That they have a code. They they're not goody goodies, but they have a code that they stick to under every circumstance possible. So take the time to scale up this NPC. You may need something to get your players out of a tough spot. This can be an opportunity where these Graveslayers kind of come out from nowhere and help save the day with your PCs.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a good way to do it, right? Just, I mean, sometimes you want to give them a challenge where they could die, but other times it's like, oh crap, I just kind of messed up. So like these guys are just like kind of like they're out on patrols and they just happen to be there at the right time and save the day. Kind of like let's use our Lord of the Rings analogy again, when the Riders of Rohan came out of nowhere and attacked the orcs, right? And the hobbits were able to get away. It's kind of one of those situations. So they'll be out there and might be able to just help out when need be, right?
Yeah, but don't forget, you have the corrupted Graveslayers. These are the undead versions of the Graveslayers who have fallen. So make sure if you have Graveslayers as part of your combat encounter, throw in a couple of their former comrades, their dead comrades who have been reanimated to go to war against the Graveslayer Canton.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. What do you have, Joe?
Well, I feel like I have a great segue, Monster, here, because we've talked a bit about some of this today, right?
Yeah.
You just mentioned the corrupted Graveslayers, and we both talked earlier about how sometimes fallen dwarves might come back in this black armor. Well, it's not just Graveslayers that go to raid the undead of Dorsh. Paladins and clerics and other young dwarves kind of looking to prove themselves may venture into the Blood Kingdom to raid the undead. And as Clay said, not all return. Sometimes the dead are left behind, and some may return as corrupted Graveslayers, but some come back as something even worse. Dwarven paladins and other would-be heroes who made holy war on the undead and were lost rise as Ghost Dwarves and march by night, sent back to slay those who originally sent them. The face of a Ghost Dwarf stares out from its black helm with a look of sheer terror, desperate and unguarded enough to horrify most dwarves. The echoes of their last words of oaths in vain and pleading with their gods fill the air around them in this chilling whisper. More powerful undead will take great pleasure in sending these shades back against their grieving kin. The Ghost Dwarves themselves will often even lead wights and other lesser undead into battle. And they are built for that. So the Ghost Dwarves, you can find these also in Creature Codex on page 171. You'll find that these are like I said, this is more of a ghost. We talk about black armor, but these are incorporeal. So they actually do have incorporeal movement, which you see on a lot of ghost type things where they can move through objects and stuff like that. And they also are vulnerable to sunlight. They have sunlight sensitivity. So if there is sunlight, which there rarely is in that region, but they would have disadvantage in attack rolls as well as wisdom checks and stuff like that. More importantly, though, they have this aura of defiance. And this is what makes them really great in a horde of undead, because the Ghost Dwarf and any undead within 10 feet of it have advantage on saving throws against effects to turn undead. So when those Graveslayers show up and they try to turn undead, everybody, any creature that's near one of these guys is going to have advantage on that saving throw. So that makes them an extra fearsome kind of enemy to have on the battlefield. The other thing that these guys have is they have ethereal sight, and they also have etherealness. So they can basically bounce back and forth between the ethereal plane and the material plane. And two things happen here. One, when they're in the ethereal plane, they can see into the material plane, but you can also see them, but you can't interact with them. And same thing when they're on the material plane. If you're in the ethereal plane, you would be able to see them there, but not interact. So there's like this visage of them still there, but they can see from one plane to another as well. So they'll bounce back and forth between the planes and move around the battlefield, and it can be a real difficult thing to fight them. As far as their attacks and stuff, now they are not strong. They are like 4 strength, 10 con. They do have some decent decks, and then they have like 10 intelligence, 14 wisdom, 15 charisma. They're averaging around 81 hit points, but again, if you max that out, it can be up to about 144 hit points. And then they sit there with 14 armor. They're CR6. Again, this might be an opportunity to buff them if your party's stronger or you want to do a little bit more with them. You can always buff their AC up a little, buff their HP up a little, but their attacks are pretty solid. So they get multi-attack, and it's a 3-attack deal. So they have a ghostly axe, right? So this is either melee or ranged. When they hit with this thing, it's doing 1d6 plus 2 slashing damage and then 2d8 necrotic damage. But what's cool is if they throw it, then like a new one appears in their hand right away. Like as soon as they throw it, a new one just materializes in their hand. So that's kind of cool. And then they have this Head of the Grave attack, which in multi-attack, they can only use this one once per turn. So when it hits, it does 18 necrotic damage or 48. But the target has to make a DC 15 con save, or its HP maximum is reduced by the amount of damage it's taken, right? So we see this kind of ability all the time in Undead. If you get reduced to 0 from this, you're dead. Fortunately, the reduction only lasts until you finish a long rest. You don't need a greater restoration on it. A restoration would probably restore you before a rest, but a long rest will do the trick for you on this one. So that's at least a little bit of relief. Now, again, if you were to bump them up and want to make them harder, require a greater restoration to fix it. I mean, you can totally do that. His last ability is a recharge ability. So it recharges on 5 and 6. It's called Prayers Unanswered. And in my description, I mentioned how the dwarves' final whispers and oaths and pleads kind of are in the air around it in this haunted fashion. Well, that's actually an ability. So the Ghost Dwarf emits a constant whisper consisting of prayers, pleading, cursing, and cryptic phrases. The volume of the whispering intermittently increases, and those within 30 feet of the Ghost Dwarf that can hear it must succeed on a DC 15 Wisdom saving throw or become frightened for 1 minute. A creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of his turns, ending the effect on success. So just imagine, like, you're fighting this thing, and you hear this constant just, like, you can hear the whispers, and every now and then when it recharges, it goes off, and it becomes like this loud, frightening, ghostly sound. Save or run. So I love the flavor of these things. Yeah. And now if you look at the art of them, it looks like this like big black metal armored thing and this ghostly face encased in it. And almost it doesn't look like someone wearing armor. It looks more like a battle suit. I love these. I think that this is a creature that you're definitely going to encounter in this campaign, because that's what happens to those who fall. I mean, this is what they become. Definitely check it out in Creature Codex, because it's one you almost have to use in Empire of Ghouls.
Yeah. I don't like to criticize Kobold Press's stuff too much, but when you look at the illustration versus the stat block itself, it's almost as if they're two different creatures. It looks like a big iron golem, so it's almost like he has a tank around him.
Yeah,
and the shade itself is imprisoned in that suit, of armor. I've looked at this, a couple of times. It's a great creature. Don't get me wrong. When I play a Ghost Dwarf as written, I'll usually show an image of a shade, just like this ethereal creature.
Makes sense.
And stuff like that. But if I want to like play a greater Ghost Dwarf, I'll combine a lot of its actions with Iron Golem or something like that, to kind of buff them up a little bit. But it's a great NPC. Don't get me wrong. If you want to play this creature, in its iron suit, maybe consider, changing the stats a little bit. You're the GM. Do what you want with the creatures. You're not going to break D&D if you change up a stat block.
You broke Dungeons and Dragons.
How dare me? But this is a great choice of NPC, Joe. I'm glad you showcased it.
And I'm going to throw a pro tip out here for you guys. So if you are like me and you 3D print minis, and you want to make a ghost of anything, be it a dwarf or a golem type. Like let's say you like this art, you're like, oh, I want to make him a ghost golem. Print it in transparent and then just use some blue ink and stain it blue, and suddenly it's a ghost. Any mini you can 3D print can be a ghost if you print it transparent and stain it like blue or green or whatever color you want. Instant ghost every time.
Yeah. That's a pretty good tip.
Yeah, I did it for a Kobold Press adventure that I ran at Gen Con a couple of years ago. I needed this like undead pharaoh looking guy for a Southlands thing,
right.
And I had this cool pharaoh looking mini, and I just printed him transparent, stained him blue, and he was a ghost.
There you go. Done.
So, yep. Pro tip.
Well, that's our show. I hope you enjoyed it. In our next show, we're going to get into the Grand Duchy of Dornig, the former electoral kingdom of Krakova, also the court in exile. And we'll talk about, what Krakova is like, in the current timeline. We're also going to talk about Fey Roads, also known as Shadow Roads. We're also going to wrap that episode in the Tomerian Forest, which is in the northeastern part of Dornig. So yikes, that's a lot of locations, but we'll give it a go. Joe, how can people reach you?
Well, you can always find me at GM Toolbox on YouTube and TikTok, Facebook and Instagram. I've taken a little bit of break from my YouTube stuff lately, but still follow me. I will be back. I've just been super busy, so I will get back to it shortly. So don't think I've given up on that. You can also grab me over on Twitter at GM Toolbox, and of course, you can always find me on the Midgard Adventures Discord server at GM Toolbox. Clay, how about you?
Yeah, you can reach me on the Midgard Adventures Discord and also on Twitter. I'm at Clayton Thompson, and that's Thompson spelled without a P. But the best place to reach us both is the Midgard Adventures Discord server. And that is an independent, fan-based cooperative group that is affiliated with Kobold Press. There, we talk lore, we share tips and tricks, we answer questions, and we offer organized play games, both online and IRL. So our community is open to everyone, particularly those new to Midgard and role-playing games in general. And then we also, for this show, we have dedicated channels for That Midgard Show on the server where you can post a comment and talk about the content below. But at least come hang out with us, lurk around the channels. The Kobolds all post on the Discord server, particularly the designers and the adventure channels. So there's an invitation link below in the description notes. Check us out.
Yep, absolutely. And, make sure you're commenting, leave us feedback. We love hearing from you guys. We're doing this entire Empire of Ghouls because one of our listeners suggested it. So let us know what you want to hear on That Midgard Show. And, we'll be happy to cover it. I mean, our ultimate goal is to get through all of it, but it's never ending. So, like I said, comment, leave us reviews, let us know what you think. Make sure that if you like our show, click the like button, subscribe to our channel, and make sure you spread the word about That Midgard Show. We're on all the major podcast platforms as well, so please subscribe there, leave your comments, leave your 5-star reviews, all of that good stuff. We really, really appreciate it, guys. So that's it for today. And remember, as Wolfgang Barr says,
strip it for parts and make it your own. Thank you for joining us. Take care, everyone. Peace.
Thank you, everyone.